What's going on, guys? This is BunnyMuffins. We have the meta snapshot for patch 12.6b. There was a pretty decently sized B patch. We're going to do a quick rundown. Assassin Smoke Bomb nerf. Twitch actually got a considerable nerf. He's going to take one more auto attack to cast now. And then Talon, he had like a bug fix, and then he got his damage reduced quite a bit at 2-star and just a tiny bit at 3-star, but his VIP also got affected as well. Warwick is going to have what seems to be a small nerf, but this is actually pretty big because he's pretty much all reliant on his attack speed. Lucian, pretty small nerfs across the board. And then Draven, small AD buff. I think Draven's in kind of a bad spot even after this because he really shines because he has great single target damage, and that's just not what is needed right now. Jihn is going to get a huge buff. Holy cow. 70 mana to 50 mana, that means he needs 2 less auto attacks in order to cast, and that is going to be big. Jihn stock definitely went up a ton. Sivir's attack speed slightly down at 1 and 2-star. In terms of Arcanists, they nerfed the trait a tiny bit at 8 Arcanists, and then for total AP for Arcanists, they are going to change that 4, 6, and 8 Arcanists. They're just going to drop it by 10 at all of those different tiers. Now onto Challengers. Challengers got a slight nerf as well. 1 at 4 Challenger, 1 at 6 Challenger, and then Chemtech damage reduction is being nerfed from 20% to 15%. And then Hextech magic damage, this is going to be reduced by 5 at 6 and 8 Hextech, and then the shield is also going to get hit. Pretty sizable. It's a 15 nerf at 4 Hextech, 50 at 6 Hextech, and then 50 at 8 as well. So that is going to be what is going to be deciding a lot of this patch this week and what's going to be played and not played. We're going to go over this entire tier list, how to play all the comps as per usual. So let's just get right into it. There's really only one comp that I think stands above the rest right now, and it is going to be the Arcanist build. I know they got slight nerfs, but because this comp is so flexible, you could either reroll it or play standard leveling and even go for like legendary carries. They pretty much have a solid carry at each level. They have a great 1-cost carry in Brand for the early game, Swain at 2 costs, great for early to mid game, and then Malzahar, of course, is a rock in the mid game, and then he can also be rerolled for 3-star for the late game. Ahri good for mid to late game, and then Victor is the late game god for Arcanist. So it's just a lot of different options you can do here. In the A tier, we have a pretty big A tier this week. Both A and B, I'd say, are pretty sizable. We have Hextech, Striker. Pretty much this is both Sivir carry. Irelia can be used in Strikers, but Sivir's much better. Snipers, we're going to see Jihn that we talked about rise up a lot. Socialite plus a random carry. You guys have a lot of different options now. We have one for Senna. We have one for Kha'Zix, Jihn, Irelia. Pretty much anything you can think of works with Socialite. Innovator is another comp that's pretty solid. Their stock rose up a little bit because all the other things got a little bit weaker, but I still think this is maybe borderline B plus A minus here, but it's not being played as much, so I am rising it up to the A tier right now, so hopefully that is something that you guys can take advantage of this week. Scrap, this is a comp of the week. This is going to be an Irelia build, which combines Innovator, Scrap, Strikers, and Socialite. And then lastly, we have the Renata Bruiser build. This is marked with like the blue exclamation point. These are great for below Masters climbing, and that's going to round out the A tier. In the B tier, Twinshots dropped a bit. Talon Assassins, great for climbing. Chemtech Challengers, this is the Warwick build. It got nerfed like pretty sizably, so I would try to avoid this right now. Debonair Draven. Draven just feels a little off right now, not really the best pick in the meta. When there are a lot of big solo tanks in the front, sometimes Draven can get stuck on them. He's really good at killing like 4 medium-sized tanks or like 3 medium-sized tanks. He's really bad at killing one really big dude in the front, and I think that's just what most of the meta is right now. Syndicate Ahri is pretty solid choice at B tier. Arcanist is better with Ahri though. Ashe Reroll, another great to climb comp if you get the right starts. And then Mutant Malzahar. This is going to be a little weird to place. Some mutants are really good, some mutants are really bad. We'll go over it in a little bit. Twitch Reroll, I moved down to C tier. It's still kind of playable, but you need like super duper 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 perfect starts for it. Same with all the other comps in the C tier. It's just not worth going for these in most of your games. Like maybe 1 out of 30 games you'll be going for one of these comps, you know? It's something like that. But let's get into how to play every single comp. So in the S tier, these are always like the highly flexible or very strong comps. This one is both. It's the Arcanist standard or reroll. You could go 4 Arcanists, you could go 6 Arcanists, you could go 8 Arcanists. All of the combinations work, which is why this comp is so powerful right now. If you do go for 6 Arcanists, take out Zyra, Silco, or Orianna to put in 2 extra Arcanists. Typically, it's going to be Ziggs and Victor. Ziggs gives Scrap with a different champion, so you add in a Scrap instead of one of the other dudes. And then Victor, of course, is going to round out the late game. You could use Ahri carry, Malzahar carry, Victor carry, all in the late game. It doesn't really matter which. Sorry, when I said Victor before, you need to add in Ziggs and Swain to get to 6 Arcanists. Swain, you just put in the front line. He's just going to be a random tank up there. There's not really too much to explain for this comp because it hasn't really changed from what it's been in the past. But we have a short guide on it over here if you like looking at that. But going on into the A tier where you have Hextech Sivir, also pretty similar to last week. You want the static shiv because Hextech does magic damage. In the front line, Bramble, Frozen Heart, Morella Namicon, or other tank items are going to be great on Alistar. I personally love Frozen Heart because it uses tiers, and apart from one static shiv, you don't really need any other tiers. So if you build a static shiv early, and you like grabbed a tier from Carousel, and then you get another tier drop later, you could just turn that into a Frozen Heart and just be pretty happy with that. An important thing to do with this comp is roll on level 7 a little more. So you know when you do standard leveling, you go to level 7 at around stage 4-1. You want to be rolling there at least like at the very minimum like 10 gold, but preferably somewhere around like 20 to 30. The reason why you want to do that is because getting like just a 1-star Sivir is a huge power spike. And then you could also solidify your comp with like Sejuani 2, Lucian 2, and things of that nature. On to the next build, we have Strikers. We have 2 builds listed out. First one is Sivir as the main carry, and then second one is Irelia. I like the Sivir version more right now because Sivir is just a better unit than Irelia. And one thing you need to note is that notice how we build a static shiv for Sivir in the Hextech build, but in the Striker build, we go for a more AD focused build because Striker gives attack damage, so we want to amplify that even more. So what you want to do for that is Infinity Edge for critical strike bonuses, Last Whisper for penetrating armor, and then Rageblade just for tons of attack speed. Overall solid build. There are many different variations of this. Right now we have 4 Striker, 4 Hextech. So you could play around with bouncing around all these different tiers of each of the units. I've even seen some versions where they play like a bunch of Bruisers for their front line instead. Onto the next build, we have Sniper Jihn. So Sniper Jihn, I have 2 builds for you guys as well. First one is going to be more focused around Jihn, and this is like the well-rounded comp. This is more like 2 Bodyguard, 2 Clockwork, 2 Enchanter, 2 Scholar, 2 Sniper, 3 Syndicate. It's really spread out. It's more of like what they call like a horizontal comp, where you kind of mix and match many different synergies. Keep in mind, whenever you do this, you could add in all sorts of units. So if you get like a random 2-star 4 cost, you might want to swap out some of the units and put those in and work around those new synergies that you get instead. That's a great thing about Jihn. He works in so many different comps, so he is a little tricky to play, I might add. The next build we have is a little easier to play. This one's the 4 Sniper, 4 Bruiser version. If you're starting out with this comp, I do recommend going for something like this instead, because the units are more static. You're not really swapping anything crazy, so it's just much easier to play. What I like about this is that you get to sneak in Enforcers with Vi, Sejuani, and Caitlyn, and then 4 Snipers deals a lot of damage. So what I like to do is put a Trap Claw, so you don't have to build a Quicksilver Sash on Jihn, so you could keep him in the corner so he does not get Blitzcrank hooked. And then also, I know there's a Tahm Kench here, but you're really not reliant on any legendaries. Zeri can be replaced with Ashe, and Tahm Kench can be replaced with Rek'Sai or Alawi. You pretty much just need any Bruiser in the front to fill out the 4 Bruiser role. You may have noticed I itemized MF, so if you're primarily going for Jihn carry, you could put like a Morella Namicon on Misfortune and call it a day and not use any other items. But one build that is getting like undercover popular right now is an MF reroll build. So what you can do is roll at level 7 for 3-star Misfortune. So if you do opt to go for that, I like going for Spear of Shojin, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Infinity Edge, but you could play stuff like Rabadon's Death Cap, you could play stuff like Giant Slayer. Lots of other options work on Misfortune. So you could either opt for the Misfortune carry or Jihn carry when you go for this type of build. But again, like the first version is the preferred version because it's more flexible. You could pretty much dip into any synergy. So difficulty for the first version, I'd say is high. Difficulty for this one, I'd say is like around medium. But pretty solid comp. Jihn did get huge buffs, so yeah, you want to probably be playing it as much as you can. Socialite plus a random carry. This is going to be the next comp. Right now, the most popular build is with Senna. We have that build listed out down here with 4 Enchanter. We have Senna with IE, Last Whisper, Giant Slayer. This is just like the highest damage output you can get for her. You don't need these exact items, but it's just what I prefer. Morgana is going to be your main tank. Normally with Morgana, the best items for her are going to be Redemption, Bramble, and Dragon Claw. Pretty much in all of her builds, she kind of does something like that. And then as you're doing this build, you may have noticed we have a lot of 3-cost units. So if you ever get stuff like Triforce, that is amazing for this comp. And it also works really well whenever the Socialite Hex is in the back line. If you're playing the Irelia version or like Kha'Zix, you could definitely play it more often because the Socialite Hex can be utilized by Irelia or Kha'Zix on any square, because literally like their positioning doesn't really matter too much. Whereas Senna, she definitely needs to be in the back line in order to truly shine. Another person you could use is also Lucian. He's a really popular one that's popping up. And like other legendaries, of course, always work in these Socialite builds. Just switch up the synergy. So if you look at this Irelia build we have right now, we add in like 2 Striker, for example. But if you're playing something like Lucian, you want to add in Twinshot, obviously. Or if you're playing like Senna, Enchanters is the obvious choice. If you're playing Kha'Zix, maybe you want to add in an Echo for 2 Assassins. So always get the synergy for your build and play at least 3 Socialite whenever you're kind of doing this. Next up, we have the Innovator build. So Innovators, they kind of disappeared for a patch, and then they came back, which is surprising because they did not get any buffs. But since every other composition got nerfed, that's why they like popped up again. My favorite is doing like Jace carry, but again, similar to the Socialite build, the 4-cost carry that you use can be pretty flexible. So in this picture here, we have the Senna 3, but you could use Jihn, you could use Irelia, you could use Kha'Zix in place of this person. And again, of course, swap up the synergies if you change the primary carry. For the main tank right now, if you're going for Senna, you use Morgana. If you're doing something else, you could use something like Vi. And of course, you have the Bear in the front as well. If you get like so many tank items that you don't know what to do with them, you could also transition Jace to the front line as well and kind of transform him into the melee version where he pretty much becomes like a 3rd or 2nd tank. Next up, we have the Scrap Irelia comp. This is a comp of the week. We are running 4 Scrap right now, but of course you could run 6. The only reason why we run 4 Scrap primarily is because it's hard to get to 6 without getting an augment for it. In this version here, we're running 3 Socialite again. It's just a very good synergy. You just put Irelia on that Socialite Hex, and we also have 4 Striker. But the thing is, you can mix this up a lot. You could go 1 Socialite, you could go 2 Striker, you could go 3 Innovator. There are a lot of different things you could switch up depending on what you're hitting in that game, which makes this comp like slightly more difficult if you don't exactly know what you're doing. But overall, you could kind of like force this build if you get a decent start for it, because the variations don't really change that much about the comp. To play this comp, you pretty much just do standard leveling because you're going for a 4-cost carry in Irelia. But one thing to note, you can roll a bit at level 7, similar to the Hextech build, because you have a bunch of 3-costs you could get to 2-star in order to stabilize your build, and that will help your team transition into the mid to late game much easier than if you like held out all your gold for level 8. Let's move on to Renata Bruisers. This is great for climbing below Masters because a lot of the higher level players, they're not really playing this comp too much, and when that happens, there's like a snowball effect, right? Or like a trickle down effect where like the weaker players stop playing this comp as well. Just because I don't really know why it's not that popular, it just isn't played as much. I think the main reason is because if you do get like a blue buff early, which is pretty good for Renata, you kind of go more towards the Arcanist route than the Bruiser route. But nothing's changed about this build since like the set came out. You pretty much just get these 3 exact items on Renata, same as usual. Just play Bruisers in the front line. It's really easy to play. You literally just throw them out there and then they just tank and waste time for Morello to tick, and then you kind of kill everyone after a while. Now onto the B tier. These comps are like a little bit weaker than the A tier, but I'd say this week the B tiers are actually all pretty solid if you get the good starts with them. Of course, for every comp, like you always want a good start for them, but like right now the B tiers aren't that far behind the A tier. So if you see something in B tier and you're like, wow, that shouldn't be B tier, like keep in mind it's pretty close right now. But for Twinshots, we changed it up a bit. No one's really playing the 6 Arcanist version anymore. They're going more for like the 3 or 4 Twinshots, and they're primarily doing Lucian carry. I've seen actually a couple of Gangplanks at super high elo, and it is interesting to see because we haven't seen that many Gangplank carries this set so far. But when they do play him, these 3 items are typically what they go for. You need Bloodthirster because he needs some sort of defensive capabilities up front, but the damage items you could mix up a little bit. Obviously, you want Last Whisper because he only does physical damage, and he's primarily attacking tanks, which typically have a lot of armor. Morgana's going to be the main carry, but the most important thing for this build is the augments. So like Triforce, you definitely want some of that. Or if you get like a Threes Company and get like some of these 2-starred really quickly, or like even the 1-stars really early, it really helps shape your build like moving forward. So you have to pay attention to the augments whenever you're going for twin shots, in my opinion. Next up, we have Talon Reroll, great for climbing because it's really easy to play. You can kind of just smash your head on the keyboard and do pretty decently. You could play this comp almost as good as like some of the better players, and while not being one of the better players. So that is the great thing about this comp. The only issue is that you could only play it in specific circumstances, and that is if you get a lot of Talons early, or if you get the Assassin or Debonair augments such as Smoke Bomb, or I forget the Debonair one. It's like they give the health to a certain person. I forget what it's called, but that one is super, super good. But pretty much you just slow roll for Talon 3 at level 6. So you go to level 6 with as much gold as you can, and then you just roll down to 50 every turn until you hit 9 copies of Talon, which makes him into a 3-star. Next up, we have Warwick Reroll, played very similarly to the Talon build because you're going for a reroll Warwick as well. And that is going to be done by rerolling at level 6 because he is a 2-cost, so you do the same thing. I have 2 different versions here. One is the Chemtech version, one is the Challenger version. They're both solid, it just depends what units you're hitting in that game, and then you pick and choose your versions based on that. One thing to note is that you don't really need to focus that much on Tryndamere Carry. It's not because he's bad, it's just that Warwick is the main focus of this comp because his spikes are just more convenient than the Tryndamere one. Whenever you're rolling for 3-star 3-cost, it's really tricky to play those because sometimes you die out before you have a chance to get the 3-star 3-cost. Onto the next build, we have Debonair Draven. So Draven's very similar to Jihn, right? He is played in a bunch of different comps. He can be mixed and matched with like all sorts of different synergies. Right now we have the 5 Debonair version, so this is a more vertical style of build, but a lot of times Draven's played very horizontally. You're mixing and matching like 6 different synergies, and you're not really focusing on one of them. So he is tricky to play if you don't navigate that correctly, especially since he's not that strong right now. So I really don't recommend playing Debonair Draven or any sort of Draven build unless he's like your favorite champion and you refuse to play anything else other than Draven. It's not because he's bad, it's just because the difficulty to reward ratio is just not that great right now. So I'm going to skip over it, but you would essentially just do standard leveling and just try to play best boards throughout the entire game. Next up, we have Syndicate Ahri. Very similar to the Arcanist build, but in the Syndicate version, she's more of like a heal bot. So a lot of people like Gunblade on Ahri. I prefer like the full damage build still, but it depends what items you get dropped during the game. One thing to note is that the items on Ahri are very flexible in this comp. So you don't need what you see on the screen here, which is Blue Buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Infinity Edge. You could do like Hextech Gunblade, you could do Hat, you can do Giant Slayer. If it gives mana or ability power or like some sort of utility that's built off of like dealing spell damage, you could put it on Ahri. That's the great thing about this build, because she isn't just required to like blow people up. She can like sustain herself and kind of just build off of that, because with 5 Syndicate, your like front line is super tanky because you get a ton of resistances. So it's just like a different style of Ahri compared to the Arcanist version. That's just one thing to keep in mind. And yeah, like standard leveling for this because you're going for a 4-cost carry. Next up, we have Syndicate Ashe Reroll. Another great comp to climb with. You just need specific starts for it, which is a lot of Ashes. And Ashe is played very similarly to the Talon and the Warwick builds, where you just reroll for Ashe 3-star at level 6. And yeah, you just do the same exact thing. You're just clicking a different champion and doing whatever synergy that champion has. So this one is Sniper and Syndicates. I've seen some 4 Sniper versions as well. I prefer 5 Syndicate. You could even do both if you get some of the augments that give you extra Syndicates or extra Snipers, so that is one thing to keep in mind there. Next up, we have Mutant Malzahar. Ah, boy, this one's a little crazy. I think the Synaptic one is really, really good still. It doesn't mean the other ones are still bad. It's just not as strong as the Synaptic one. So with the Synaptic one, you could do crazy stuff like putting Mutant Spatula on Ahri. Kha'Zix gets buffed up a bunch. You could do like a bunch of different Kha'Zix carry builds. But you could still do Malzahar. He's still not a bad guy. He's just not as good as before. But all the other mutants, they're still playable, but you just need better starts compared to the Synaptic one, which is like the less mana one. I wrote down like small snippets here if you guys want to check that out. Next up, we have the C tier Twitch Innovator Reroll. Yeah, when you nerf Twitch and he takes one more auto to get his attack off, of course it's going to be much worse, right? He's very delicate because he kind of snowballs the early game because he is really strong in the early game. I don't really find him that strong in the late game. So if you don't get people's HPs like super low because he got nerfed a bit, he's going to be a lot weaker than he was before. It's like, doesn't take a huge brain to figure that out. But essentially for this build, this is a 1-cost reroll. You want to reroll at level 5. And yeah, Twitch is the best one. You could do Camille, Singe, Ezreal. You could go 5 Innovator. You could go like 4 Assassin. Lots of different versions you can play. It really just depends on what you're hitting as you're rerolling. So if you hit a lot of Ezreals and Singes, you probably want to go the Innovator version. If you're hitting only Twitch, maybe you go for 4 Assassins. Add in like a Kha'Zix Nocturne to round that comp out. And then if you hit a lot of the Chemtechs, I've even seen like 5 Chemtech versions of Twitch. It's a little weird, but and less played, but if you're hitting the units, like you might as well go for them. So you have to like be wary of what you're hitting as you're rolling down whenever you're playing this comp. Yordle reroll, yeah, just Corki is just not that great of a carry right now. The only way you would play this comp is if you get the So Small augment or the one that gives items like Thieving Rascals is what I think it's called. If you don't get those, just don't even bother with this build. Reroll Brand, man. You compare his numbers compared to other numbers, it's just lower. So I wouldn't recommend playing this build. But hey, if you are on stage 3-1 and you have a 3-star brand already, like that would be the only scenario I would play this. Like let's say you just like happen to hit it for free, like then yeah, sure, play this comp. But apart from that, like I would try to avoid this because come on guys, we have like 10 other comps. More than that, like almost 15 other comps you could play. Just play some of the other ones. Just avoid Brand if you want to climb. I mean, if you don't want to climb, you could play Brand every game, but it just wouldn't be that great for your LP. So that is a personal decision. Just to sum up again, like all these comps in the S, A, and B tier, they're very close together this patch. I feel like this is pretty balanced, at least so far. Maybe there's like a new patch discovery in a couple days that kind of switches things up a bit, but like Arcanists, they're like barely better than the A tiers. The A tiers are barely better than the B tiers. It's really close right now. So anything you play from these things, like you're going to be doing fine for it if you have like decent starts for it. Because you really just have to play TFT at the end of the day. Forcing a comp, I don't think is like that recommended on this patch unless you're doing like only Arcanist or maybe only Sivir and flexing between Striker and Hextech Sivir. So that's pretty much my thoughts on the patch this week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll leave this up on my website at bunnymuffins.lol/meta as per usual, and we'll update this next Friday because there's going to be a new patch on Wednesday, so definitely look out for that. But I think that's going to be it from me today. I will see you all later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.